My in-laws threw me out as worthless. For years later, I came back on a private jet with my business. When I married Ethan Rourke, I thought I had found the person I would build a life with. He was charming, the kind of man who made promises that felt solid and real. His parents, Harold and Marjorie, never liked me from the beginning. They made it clear I wasn't good enough for their son. I came from a modest background, and in their eyes, that meant I didn't belong in their wealthy world. When Ethan lost his job, everything changed. Instead of pulling together, I found myself carrying the weight alone. I worked long shifts, morning to night, just to make sure the bills were paid. I thought my effort would show them I was strong and loyal, but to his parents, it didn't matter. They mocked me openly, whispering cruel things at family dinners, calling me dead weight and worthless. Every word was like a stone thrown at me, but I stayed quiet. I told myself if I kept working hard, if I proved myself, they might see my value one day. I held on to that hope far too long. Ethan began to drift away from me. He stopped meeting my eyes, stopped speaking to me with kindness. I felt him slipping, but I didn't know how far until one night I learned the truth. He was cheating. And not just with anyone. He was with a family friend, a woman his parents always praised as someone better suited for. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. It was as if he had been waiting for me to find out so he could be free of me. That's when his parents stepped in. They looked at me with smug faces and said what they had probably been dying to say all along. That I wasn't good enough, that Ethan deserved better. They told me to leave. I remember the moment clearly. They shoved a suitcase into my hands, thrown together in a rush, as if my years of sacrifice meant nothing. I stood there in their house, with my heart breaking, clutching a bag that held only scraps of my life. They didn't just discard me, they humiliated me. That night, I walked out with nothing. No husband, no home, no family to turn to. I thought it was the end of everything for me. But what none of them knew was that it was only the beginning. After Ethan filed for divorce, I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I had no home to return to, no savings worth speaking of, and no one in that town I could lean on. My parents had passed years before, and friends I thought I could count on slowly drifted away once they realized whose side they'd rather be on. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me, and each morning I woke up wondering how I would even make it through the day. I found a room for rent above a laundromat on the edge of town. It was small, with peeling wallpaper and a single window that rattled in the wind. The ceiling leaked when it rained, and I shared a bathroom down the hall with 3 other tenants. Still, it was the only place I could afford. At night, the smell of detergent and steam seeped up through the floorboards, and the sound of machines churning never stopped. I would lie on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, asking myself how my life had turned into this. The money I had left barely covered rent and cheap food. I took whatever work I could find, washing dishes, running errands, sometimes cleaning offices. It wasn't enough to pull me out of the hole, but it kept me alive. I had no plan, no clear direction. Most days I just felt numb, as if I were walking through someone else's life. One afternoon, while helping carry groceries for an older woman in my building, I met Clara Jensen. She was a widow who lived alone a few blocks away. Clara had kind eyes that noticed too much, and she invited me in for tea, as if she already knew I needed someone to talk to. I resisted at first, ashamed of where I had ended up, but Clara didn't let me keep my distance. She reminded me of the kind of steady presence I'd been missing for so long. Over time, Clara and I grew close. She told me about the small business she and her late husband once ran, how she had managed the books and kept things organized. One day, when she noticed me struggling with a side job involving paperwork, she sat down beside me and began teaching me how to balance ledgers. I thought it would be boring, but to my surprise, the numbers made sense to me. It felt like fitting puzzle pieces together. The more Clara showed me, the more interested I became. She explained invoices, contracts, and the basics of branding. She told me how even the smallest detail, like the way a business presented itself, could make a difference. I began to realize I had a natural talent for spotting problems and fixing them, for seeing opportunities where others only saw obstacles. In that tiny apartment above the laundromat, with the constant hum of dryers below, something shifted inside me. I didn't know it yet, but the long nights with Clara at her kitchen table, the stacks of papers she let me practice on, were planting a seed. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope, a quiet voice telling me that maybe I could create something of my own, something no one could take away from me. I started picking up small jobs wherever I could. At first, it was just typing up receipts, filing papers, or keeping track of appointments for small shops around town. The pay wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of purpose and kept food on my table. I realized that many local businesses didn't have the time or skill to handle their paperwork properly, so I stepped in to help. Word spread slowly, and soon I had a handful of people calling me whenever they needed things organized. The more I worked, the more I paid attention to how these businesses were run. Most of them were owned by hardworking families who were great at their craft, baking, farming, running stores. But they struggled when it came to managing supplies, deliveries, or keeping everything flowing smoothly. I kept seeing the same problems repeat themselves. Deliveries were late, inventory was messy, and money was lost because no one kept track of what came in and what went out. I began to think about it constantly. Every time I saw another shop owner complain about late shipments or missing orders, I felt like there had to be a better way. One night, sitting at the small table in my room above the laundromat, I pulled out a notebook and started sketching ideas. I wrote down everything I had noticed, what was broken, what could be fixed, and how it might work if someone stepped in to connect the pieces. I didn't know much about logistics at the time, but I knew enough to see there was a need. Clara noticed how restless I had become. When I showed her the pages filled with scribbles and arrows, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. "You've got an eye for this," she said. "Most people walk past problems. You see solutions." Her words stayed with me. She had lived through her own struggles, and her confidence in me felt like a hand lifting me out of the mud. Still, I worried I was dreaming too big. Starting something of my own felt impossible when I barely had money for it. But Clara wouldn't let me give up. She told me every business had to start small and reminded me that even she and her husband began with almost nothing. One afternoon, she pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. Inside was $500. I stared at it, my throat tight, unable to speak. "This isn't charity," Clara said firmly. "This is an investment. Use it to make your idea real." With that money, I registered my business. Writing the name felt like claiming a piece of myself back. I called it Whitford Solutions, using my maiden name because it reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart. I wanted to prove that I could stand on my own without Ethan, without his family, and without anyone else deciding my worth. As I held the official papers in my hands, a rush of determination filled me. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. When I first tried to get clients, I ran into wall after wall. I knocked on doors, sent out letters, and sat in waiting rooms hoping for a chance to explain what I could do. Most people barely listened. Some smiled politely and told me they'd think about it. Others brushed me off before I even finished my pitch. More than once, I heard the same words: "You're too young," or "You don't have enough experience." It stung, but I refused to stop. I carried my folder everywhere, ready to show my notes and ideas at a moment's notice. Weeks turned into months and rejection piled up. I spent nights lying awake in my tiny room, wondering if I had made a mistake. Still, every morning I pushed myself to try again. I told myself that somewhere, someone needed what I was offering. I just had to keep going until I found them. Finally, one chance came from a regional farm outside town. They were struggling with late deliveries and spoiled produce because their system was a mess. I begged them to let me take a look at their operations. At first, they hesitated, but something in my voice must have convinced them. They gave me a small trial job, more as a test than real trust. I threw myself into it with everything I had. I walked their fields, studied their schedules, and followed trucks to see where time was being wasted. I created new routes, built charts to track inventory, and set up a schedule that matched their needs. It was exhausting, but I loved it. For the first time, I was solving problems in the real world, not just on paper. When the farm saw the results, their reaction shocked me. Deliveries that used to take days were arriving in hours. Their profits climbed because less food went bad in storage. They looked at me with surprise, almost disbelief, and then with respect. I had proved myself. Word of that success spread faster than I expected. Farmers talked to each other, and soon another one called me. Then a small grocery chain reached out. Little by little, I was no longer chasing clients. They were coming to me. As the work grew, I realized I couldn't handle everything alone. I hired one assistant, then another. They weren't highly trained, but they were eager and hardworking. We crammed into a modest office above a hardware store, with old desks and second-hand chairs. It didn't look like much, but it felt like a dream. I finally had a team, and together we made the impossible happen. Each job taught me new lessons. I kept pushing for better ways to organize shipments, smoother communication, and faster turnaround. Clients noticed not just the results, but also how seriously I took their struggles. They trusted me because I never promised more than I could deliver, but when I delivered, it was beyond what they imagined. Slowly, my name began to mean something. Whitford Solutions wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was alive, growing stronger with every project. Within 2 years, my company grew far beyond what I had imagined in the beginning. At first, we only handled a handful of farms and small stores, but soon larger contracts started rolling in. Businesses from across the state began calling, asking for help to fix their tangled supply systems. Whitford Solutions expanded step by step, until our trucks and schedules reached into cities I had never even visited. Every cent we earned, I put straight back into the business. While others might have spent their profits on nice clothes, cars, or vacations, I lived simply. My meals were basic, my apartment small, and I wore the same few outfits until the fabric grew thin. I didn't care. Every dollar I saved meant more drivers, more equipment, and more staff. I was building something that could last, and nothing else mattered. As our presence grew, people began to notice. Local papers started running short stories about our success, and then bigger outlets picked it up. Journalists described our approach as disruptive, a new way of thinking about logistics. I never chased attention, but I couldn't stop the spotlight from finding me. Reporters wanted to know how a woman with no background, no connections, and no wealth had managed to climb so quickly in a field usually dominated by big corporations. I answered with honesty. I told them I saw problems and fixed them, nothing more. But inside, I knew it was more than that. It was persistence. Still, even with growth and praise, old wounds stayed raw. Late at night, when the office lights were off and the city outside was quiet, my mind drifted back to Ethan and his parents. I could hear their voices calling me worthless, see their faces twisted with contempt. No matter how far I came, those memories burned in me like a scar. It wasn't pain alone that kept me moving, it was determination. They had thrown me away, sure that I would crumble. But every contract I signed, every new client that trusted me, felt like another stone laid on the foundation of my revenge. Not revenge through shouting or arguments, but through undeniable success. I promised myself that one day I would stand in front of them again, not as the broken woman they discarded, but as someone they could never ignore. I didn't know when that moment would come, but I could feel it building with each passing month. The bigger Whitford Solutions grew, the closer I came to that day. So I kept my head down, kept working, and kept building. I knew the time would come when they would see me again, not because I sought them out, but because my success would be too large for them to avoid. And when that moment arrived, I would be ready. As the company grew, I realized I couldn't handle everything on my own anymore. The work had become too complex, the contracts too big, and the staff too many. That's when I met Marcus Hale. He had years of experience in logistics and a sharp mind for details I sometimes overlooked. From the first meeting, I could tell he wasn't just another employee. He was someone who could help carry the weight with. Hiring him turned out to be one of the best choices I ever made. Marcus was calm under pressure, quick to solve problems, and had a way of making the team feel confident even when challenges piled up. For the first time in a long while, I felt I didn't have to stand alone. Trusting anyone after what I had been through wasn't easy, but Marcus slowly earned that trust, step by step. He also saw something in me I often struggled to see in myself. Whenever I doubted my decisions or questioned if I was good enough to run a company of this size, Marcus pushed back. He reminded me that I had built everything from the ground up, and that leadership wasn't about knowing all the answers. It was about making the hard choices and standing by them. His encouragement gave me strength during the times I felt the weight of responsibility pressing too heavily on my shoulders. While Whitford Solutions moved forward, Ethan's world was collapsing. His business attempts failed one after another, leaving him with nothing but debts. Jobs didn't last, and without a steady income, he leaned heavily on his parents. The man who once looked down on me was now struggling to survive under the same roof that had once thrown me out. Harold and Marjorie, so proud and judgmental before, now had to carry their son as he stumbled through one failure after another. I didn't need to see it to know the picture. Whispers found their way back to me through acquaintances and old connections. I heard enough to understand that their lives were no longer as perfect as they had once pretended. At the same time, my name began to travel further. Business circles buzzed with talk about the woman who had built a logistics company from scratch and was now taking on bigger players. The Rourkes heard pieces of these stories, though they didn't yet understand just how far I had come. To them, I was probably still that girl they dismissed as nothing. They had no idea that every late night, every hard decision, and every victory was bringing me closer to the moment when they would see me again. And when that day came, I would no longer be the one standing in their shadow. I would be the one casting it. Winning the government contract changed everything for me. It was the kind of deal that most companies dreamed about but rarely got. When I signed the papers, I could hardly believe it myself. The numbers were so large that I had to read them several times to make sure I wasn't imagining. That contract didn't just bring in money. It lifted Whitford Solutions into a new league. Suddenly, we weren't just a growing business. We were a serious player. The scale of the work forced me to think bigger than ever before. Trucks alone weren't enough to handle what we had promised. We needed faster, wider coverage. That's when I decided to invest in planes. Buying a fleet felt unreal, as if I were stepping into a world I had only ever seen from a distance. But it made sense. It gave us speed, reach, and control over our own schedule. Those planes became more than just tools for business. They were symbols of how far I had come. With the company thriving, I finally experienced what real wealth felt like. I bought properties not for show, but because they were smart investments. I built assets that would last, things no one could take from me. For years, I had lived with nothing, scraping by in a tiny room with peeling wallpaper. Now I walked through spaces that were mine, paid for by my own work. Each step in those places reminded me that I had built this life with my own 2 hands. Along the way, something inside me shifted. I began to carry myself differently. I dressed with care, choosing clothes that spoke of quiet strength rather than flash. I no longer felt the need to explain myself or prove anything in words. Confidence became part of me, not because of what I wore, but because I finally believed in what I was capable of. When I entered a room now, people listened. Not because I demanded it, but because they could sense I belonged there. It didn't take long for the Rourkes to hear my name again. At first, I'm sure they thought it was just a coincidence, another woman with the same last name. But as stories spread about Whitford Solutions and its rapid rise, they realized it was me. The same Leah they had laughed at. The same one they had kicked out with a suitcase. I can only imagine their shock when they read about my company in business papers or heard my name spoken in meetings. For them, I had always been worthless. Now the world saw me as someone worth watching. And deep down, I knew the moment was coming when they would have no choice but to face what I had become. The invitation came in the mail with heavy paper and gold lettering. It was for a corporate gala in New York, the kind of event where powerful people gathered to make deals and show off their influence. Years ago, I never would have imagined my name on that guest list. Now, it felt like the natural next step. I bought a simple black gown, elegant but not flashy, and arrived at the hotel where the gala was being held. The chandeliers glowed above polished marble floors, and the air buzzed with voices and laughter. As I moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging greetings, I noticed a group of faces I knew all too well. The Rourkes were there. Time had not been kind to them. Harold looked weary, his shoulders stooped. Marjorie still carried herself with that sharp edge of pride, but there was a bitterness in her eyes. Ethan looked the worst of them all. His face had aged beyond his years, and the confident charm he once wore so easily was gone. I learned quickly from whispers in the room that their investments had been failing. They were no longer the powerful family they used to be. Instead, they were desperate, clinging to anyone who might offer them a lifeline. Ethan spotted me first. His eyes widened, and he began moving through the crowd toward me. For a moment, I thought he might turn back, but he didn't. He stopped in front of me, his voice low, his words hesitant. "Leah," he said, almost as if my name tasted strange on his tongue. He tried to smile, but it came out twisted, full of regret. "You look different." Before I could respond, Marjorie appeared at his side. Her eyes swept over me, and I saw the sneer form on her lips, just like old times. "So this is what you've made of yourself," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Still just a girl who married above her station. Don't think a fancy dress changes that." The old me might have argued. She might have cried or shouted or tried to defend herself. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Instead, I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small card case. Without a word, I handed Marjorie one of my business cards. The card was thick, the kind you couldn't bend easily, with the Whitford Solutions logo embossed in shining gold across the front. Marjorie took it automatically, her fingers curling around it as she looked down. For a moment, silence hung between us. She read the name, then looked up at me with confusion flickering across her face. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. I simply gave her a small, calm smile and turned back to the people waiting to speak with. Behind me, I could feel their stares burning into my back. For the first time, they were the ones left speechless. Months after the gala, news reached me that the Rourkes were drowning in financial trouble. Their investments had failed one after another, debts piled up, and the family name no longer carried the same weight it once did. For years they had looked down on me, certain I would never be more than a burden. Now they were the ones losing everything. That was when I made my decision. I was going to return home, not in shame this time, but in strength. And I would do it in a way they could never ignore. I arranged for one of my company's private jets, freshly painted with the Whitford Solutions insignia across its side, to take me back. The bold letters gleamed in the sunlight as we touched down at the small local airport. Word spread quickly through the town. People gathered by the fences, curious to see who was arriving. The sound of the jet's engines drew them closer, and when the door opened, all eyes turned to me. I stepped out onto the stairs with calm composure, dressed neatly, every movement steady. There was no need for drama. My presence alone carried the message. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some recognized me instantly, shocked by how much I had changed. Others learned the truth on the spot, that I was the same woman once discarded by the Rourkes, the one they had called worthless. Now I was back as the owner of a company employing thousands and flying my own plane. The Rourkes themselves were there, standing stiffly at the edge of the gathering. Harold's face was pale, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of his failures pressed down on him. Marjorie looked tight-lipped, her pride fighting against the humiliation. Ethan avoided my gaze, his expression bitter, older, broken. I didn't walk toward them. Instead, I moved to the podium set up near the hangar. Cameras clicked, and the townspeople fell quiet as I began to speak. I announced the opening of a new distribution hub right there in the community, a facility that would bring hundreds of jobs and steady income for local families. It wasn't just business. It was a way of giving back to the place where I had once been left with nothing. As I spoke, the crowd erupted in applause. People cheered, clapping and calling my name, proud that someone from their town had risen so high and chosen to return. Their faces were full of hope, excitement, and respect. I could see them picturing the future this hub would bring, a future where opportunity would no longer be so scarce. The Rourkes, however, stood apart. They didn't clap. They didn't smile. They couldn't. For the first time, they had to watch me stand in the light while they faded into the shadows. All their power, their arrogance, their cruel words, it had all crumbled. And I had risen above it. I didn't need to say a word to them. The jet, the announcement, the applause of the crowd, all of it spoke louder than anything I could ever have said. After the announcement at the airport, the crowd slowly drifted away, but the Rourkes lingered. I could see Ethan watching me from a distance, shifting on his feet as if fighting an inner battle. Finally, he walked over. His voice trembled, and his eyes carried the same desperation I once had when I begged him to love me. "Leah," he said, reaching for me but stopping short. "I made a mistake. I see that now. I was wrong to hurt you, wrong to let you go. You've become everything I always knew you could be. Please take me back. We can start over." His words felt hollow. They weren't filled with love, only regret for what he had lost. The man who once turned his back on me now wanted to cling to the life I had built. Before I could respond, Harold and Marjorie stepped forward. Their faces carried forced smiles, the kind people wear when they're begging for something. Harold cleared his throat. "Leah," he began, his tone softer than I had ever heard. "We may have judged you too quickly. Clearly, you've proven yourself. Perhaps there's a way we could work together. An investment, maybe. It would benefit both sides." Marjorie nodded eagerly, her eyes darting between me and the logo shining on the jet behind. "Yes," she added quickly. "Your company is impressive, and we would be proud to be part of it. We were wrong before. But families make mistakes. Surely you understand that." I looked at the three of them, the people who had once thrown me out with nothing but a suitcase. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by need. And yet, even now, they didn't truly see me. They only saw what I could give them. I stood tall, meeting their eyes one by one. My voice was steady, calm, and sharp. "For years ago, you called me worthless. Now you'll have to live with the fact that I made myself worth more than you could ever imagine, without you." The silence that followed was heavy. Their smiles faded, their eyes dropped, and the truth of my words cut through whatever pride they had left. I didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked back toward the jet, where Marcus and my team were waiting. Their faces were full of quiet respect, ready to continue the journey we had built together. As I climbed the steps, I didn't look back. The engines roared to life, and the ground fell away beneath us as we soared into the sky. Below, the Rourkes stood small and powerless, left to face the wreckage of their own choices. Above, I moved forward, stronger than ever, untouchable, and ready for whatever came next. Do you think Ethan made the right choice by betraying me and siding with his family, or should he have stood by my side when things got tough? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.